are talking about the tragic death of Rebecca Zahau. There is a considerable controversy as to whether or not this was a suicide, as it has been ruled by law enforcement in San Diego, or if in fact this was a murder. Her family does not believe that she has killed herself, and in that process, they made the decision to exhume the body. And they did that for Dr. Wecht to have the opportunity to do a second autopsy to find out if everything that could be learned from the body had been learned. Expert forensic pathologist and author of From Crime Scene to Courtroom, Dr. Sarah Wecht, is joining us via satellite from Pittsburgh. Dr. Wecht, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you so much for what you've done on this case.
Well, thank you, Dr. Phil, for everything you've done, and I'm happy to have the opportunity to participate in this discussion.
Dr. Wecht, how often do you do a second autopsy, either after an exhumation or before the body is actually buried? Are you often called in to do this type thing, or is it extremely rare?
I do about a dozen to a dozen and a half second autopsies every year, and about 3 or 4 every year would be exhumations. So now I've been doing this almost 50 years, so I've done quite a few exhumations and several hundred second autopsies.
Mm-hmm. Well, and in this case, we're going to get to your results here in just a moment, but having done it now and been back through the process, was this an appropriate decision for the family to make? Was this worth having been done?
Yes, absolutely. In order to pursue this matter in an intelligent and meaningful and hopefully productive fashion, a second autopsy definitely had to have been done by a forensic pathologist. It did not have to be me, but by someone who has experience and some past particular experience in exhumation autopsies.
Well, Doctor, I have followed your career for many, many years, and you say it didn't have to be you, but you have done 17,000 autopsies and supervised 30,000 more. So you're the go-to guy for this sort of thing. Tell me what you think, having reviewed the autopsy that was done down here. Did they do a good job? Were they thorough?
The autopsy itself was thorough. I have no criticism of the actual physical performance of the postmortem examination. It's the findings that were there and some that were not there that puzzle me, and when correlated with all the things that have been discussed so thoroughly and meticulously in the program here today, that lead me to express grave and serious doubts about the conclusion that the manner of death was suicide. I agree with the cause of death, asphyxiation due to hanging. To be specific with regard to the findings, you've got the binding, and we'll come back to that, but you've got 4 separate hemorrhages beneath the scalp. They're reported by the original pathologist. It's not something that I'm finding or conjecturing or embellishing upon. They are there. I have yet to have explained to me, and I've gone through the different scenarios in my mind. I've discussed them with other people, and I have yet to hear from the people there, the law enforcement individuals involved, how you get 4 separate subscalpular hemorrhages on the top of your head from a vertical hanging. You have to have blunt force trauma. You have to have the head impacting against some object 4 times or be struck by something 4 times of a rounded, blunt force nature so as not to produce lacerations of the scalp. The important and significant thing about these hemorrhages are that when you have hemorrhages like that beneath the scalp, that connotes that there was sufficient force that went into the intracranial cavity, and that means that you could have had a concussion, and when you have a concussion, you might have unconsciousness. And when you get to the question of, gee, there's no evidence of a struggle and so on, yeah, if someone is immobilized in that fashion, that can explain that. Now then, another finding that has been partially alluded to are the neck injuries. There are fractures of the cartilaginous structures in the front, but if you have a body that plummets dead weight down, and that's the old-fashioned hanging, the reason it was done was to break the neck to ensure that the person did not suffer. You have a cervical vertebral fracture, especially in a delicate individual like this, doesn't have a lot of heavy musculature of the paravertebral muscles. We have no fractures of the cervical vertebrae. The skull is not disarticulated from the atlas, the first cervical vertebra. and that bothers me greatly with this kind of a situation. Now, when you put all of that together...
Dr. Wecht, let me interrupt you for just 1 second here. Take a breath, and know that, you know, I'm here with Mary and Doug, as you know, and they are hearing all of this for the first time. So the autopsy's been done, but they're hearing the results for the first time now. You've just talked about the fact that there were these 4 impacts to the head that appear to be blunt force trauma. And you've examined the damages to the neck. You've told us what you found in medical terms. What does that mean to you as a medical examiner and a pathologist?
Well, number one, with regard to the subscapular hemorrhages, then it cries out for an explanation. The law enforcement people there claim to have conducted a reenactment, etc. I would like to hear from them how you get 4 separate impacts to the top of the head in a vertical hanging. And the significance of that is that those kinds of impacts might lead to a concussion, could lead to temporary unconsciousness. And that could be very significant in trying to understand the dynamics of this scenario.
Right, because that would explain why there were no defensive wounds and the toxicology was drug-free. We've got to take a break. There's much more from Dr. Wecht that this family is hearing for the first time. We'll be right back.